I'll put the link on Twitter. All right, we are live. So let me put this link on the Twitter while we're waiting for a few people to join.
All right, I will retweet you when that happens.
All right. Hey, I see a few people joining. Hello, I'm just putting this link on the Twitter.
Capital F-I-P-E.
Forgot to turn my robot off. I actually just lost my sight last year, so all of this is very new.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, quite unexpected, and so all of this is like, definitely a learning experience.
Wow.
But with that,
I just said wow.
yeah, it's kind of bananas. So I see some people joining. Thank you so much. You guys smash the like button, hit subscribe. I'm trying to get monetized on my own now. And I have a bunch of super chats waiting that I don't get to unless I get more subscribers.
Gotta smash that subscribe button to get the it's 1,000, right? Is the threshold?
Yeah, but it's only been like a week and a half, so I only have like 600 or something.
Right, okay.
So like, please subscribe. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for joining. I know my comrades from End the Wars and the Damn Wars, they are very excited about my guest tonight, Mr. Ford Fischer. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So you are actually a journalist, documentarian, and you've also worked on films such as, they've used your footage on Black Klansman, which is freaking amazing. Borat, a subsequent movie film, which is also amazing. But you've also done some documentaries, and I actually saw one the other day. The American Insurrection, I definitely recommend that to people. It actually gave a very balanced look and very good way of describing everything that happened without, Rachel Maddow and things like that. So a lot of your work, well, actually, let's take it back. You are quite young, which I'm sure you hear every day. But I was reading, your bio online, and it said that you started filmmaking when you were in high school.
I will actually say I very first got into like videography when I was 12. I had a friend who has since gone into music. So like our dream is that like at some point he'll get to like do the music for a film that I make. Like that would be like the perfect like sort of reconnection. But we started making kind of like silly backyard just films when I was 12, and so that became like very early like the craft that I really like. I started doing it professionally though at my local cable station in high school, which was called Boxford Cable TV. And so that was basically filming things like library board meetings, like, local town politics and like town sports and music and things like that. And then I went to college expecting actually to do like film as a narrative fiction film. I studied film and media arts, but then very quickly fell into kind of the news and documentary space being here in Washington, D.C., and ultimately co-founded News to Share with Trey Yinks, who at the time was, a fellow student at American University. And, since then, I've continued to run News to Share, and he actually now is one of Fox News's foreign correspondents. I believe as we speak, actually, he's in Afghanistan right now. So he's doing very, very frontline reporting as well. But so on my own front, I tend to cover political activism is really the subject that I find very interesting. And I do so in a way that's meant to be kind of like high quality videography that's both for audiences and sort of documentary inclusion.
Absolutely. And so when you first got started with that in high school and filming, even though it was local politics, were you political, or was it just more like you wanted to do film?
So I think what it kind of inspired in me a little bit was like a concern about government transparency, more so than like a political like left right issue. Like I try not to like address my own like political beliefs too much in venues like this, because I think that it might distract from like the actual content. Like I try not to have my own politics inform my work for the most part. But I will say that like my ideology in high school was different from my ideology in college, is basically different from where I'm at now. And but I think that kind of a guiding principle like the whole time has been like, you know, the government as untransparent, and the solution to that being, you know, journalism that's as raw as possible. So when I was filming government hearings and meetings and so forth, like something that I observed a lot and I think was pretty formative to me at that age was that there was definitely like a lack of transparency, where like there was like, again, this was a town of like 8,000 people. This is a small rural town, but there was a combativeness toward the concept of public meetings being filmed, where like like I once tried to film a library board meeting, and they actually like they got there early and then locked the door, like to make it like difficult to go inside to film it. And there was the overuse of like executive sessions, for example, where essentially the difference between like a normal session of a selectman hearing in that town and the executive session is that they basically say, we're going to be talking about the stuff now that the public isn't allowed to hear. And it was often sort of reported to me sort of in back channels, the stuff they were talking about isn't what they said, or like is, you know, are required to be talking about in order to speak in secret. So, you know, I think that from an early age, I kind of was skeptical of like government and whether they're going to sort of tell you everything. And the kind of ideological solution that I have to that issue is that in the same way that I think that the mainstream media often condenses, excludes, or otherwise kind of just tells you what the state would like you to know about something, I think that the solution, at least in the type of work that I do, is attempting to film things in a very beginning to end way, so that what you say about them is accountable to the entire video. So just to put that into like from philosophical into like very specific terms, like when you watch a news story on the news, it might be 2.5 minutes long, but it's assembled from all of these things that were cut down into little, you know, bite-sized chunks or whatever. While my footage has been included in that kind of story, I try to live stream events beginning to end, no matter what kind of event they are. And so by doing that, the public has access to all of the footage that I captured, or an angle of everything that I captured at an event. And therefore, if it was somehow edited deceptively, you know, whatever, that they would be able to see the context of every shot. And that's not something that the media makes available. When the state puts out, you know, statements or whatever, obviously, like they're, to the extent that they release documents when they want to, it's often because they want to prove something about them, right? Limited release of, you know, only the part of the body cam footage that they want the public to see, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting because you actually have, well, news to share, which is partly yours. You're the editor.
Actually, I had a lighting system and then I was trying to adjust it and it just like fell off. So I'll just use the computer's backlight. I'm sitting on my porch. It like fell off the rail. I'm sorry. Continue, please.
It's all good. So your news to share, which you're the editor-in-chief of, and you co-own with your comrade.
No, I do own it. Sorry, that was what I was saying.
Own it.
I fully own it. I bought out my co-founder.
I see.
Yep.
So the interesting thing about you that I don't know anyone else who can say this, you actually have White House credentials, but also film activism, which is really interesting to me because usually they don't want people like us, you know, around. So it's really like, how does one obtain, White House credentials?
Well, so basically the system is that most people actually, I think, or most people in journalism are capable of basically sending the White House an email and saying, I would like to come to the White House on XYZ date. and they essentially do like background checks, and that's like day by day. I got a physical credential, so and I was able to do that. I've done that for a very long time, like including like when we were in college. Trey and I used to go to the White House, and so that was like basically pretty easily permissible. So I did that both under the last four. I'm trying to press secretary. Sorry, I'm like forgetting the word. Of the from Obama into Trump. So I attended press briefings under Josh Earnest, Sarah Sanders, Sean Spicer, and Jay Carney, not in that order. But they would very seldom call on either of us. So once Trey went on to work for a larger network, he was definitely getting called on, but I, for the most part, was not getting called on. And so I would have opportunities like the ability to, film Obama and then later Trump, like get into helicopters and stuff like that, which is still fun and interesting. But frankly, it's the kind of stuff that I think national networks like doing, and it probably didn't serve as much utility to me. So I did get a physical White House pass when I worked for Daily Mail, doing videography for them on the side. And to be clear, like I never left News to Share. That was just like kind of an extra job that I was able to do. But after when COVID happened, I was no longer sort of going. They severely restricted the number of people who could attend the briefings and so forth. And so I actually haven't gone back to the White House since March of 2020.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there might be some value in doing it, and I like having kind of high quality video of certain moments in history. It was fun taking 4K footage of Trump getting into the helicopter, but I think it would certainly get old. Like it's not something that I particularly want to do often, because my sort of business is in the licensing of videography, not so much in the trying to raise my hand and then not getting called on in a press briefing. So I don't see quite as much utility in me doing it. Like my time is better spent filming activism where people are really responsive to it, and I'm filling in a need that's not there. There's virtually nothing at the White House that I would film that there aren't already 20, 30 cameras already filming.
Right. I mean, wouldn't there be some sort of like clause or at least unspoken agreement that you wouldn't use it creatively? Let's say the footage you get, or
no, I mean, it certainly has to be like for journalism. I mean, I don't think that somebody can't go to the White House and be like filming a professional movie, but I've gone there, for example, on a documentary shoot with a German outlet that was like doing a day, sort of a day in the life of like the halls of power, like under Trump. So it was like they were just filming different aspects. Like they followed a lobbyist, they followed me, a journalist, they filmed Trump at the same time as they were filming me. Like, but they so that was kind of a documentary style. Like it had music and so forth. But it was still an act of journalism. Like I think if somebody was filming like a like a movie, then no, they would not go to the White House to do that, or they should not. I would say they should not be issued a press credential to do that.
One of the things that is very interesting with your work is you do. Well, I was looking through a lot of pictures, and okay, yeah, my eyesight sucks, but it looks like you're typically wearing a helmet and a bulletproof vest.
Only at events that I think necessitate those things. I mean, I don't just I sometimes see journalists who wear bulletproof vests to things that they probably shouldn't be wearing bulletproof vests at, and I'm kind of like, you look like a dork, but yeah, I mean, like I think the photo they use of me on Wikipedia is me at but that was an event in Portland that it later turned out there were literally Proud Boys with like rifles on like rooftops on that particular day. So I mean, while no shots were fired on that particular day, like I don't think that it was unreasonable to wear it then. So I tend to wear a vest if it's an event that is going to have a high amount of open carry, as well as like some kind of conflict. Like I don't even necessarily wear a vest every time I'm going to be at an event where guns are present. But the thing that causes me to be much more likely to wear various protective gear is there going to be a two-sided engagement, right? Am I going to an event where it's people who fight the police, for example, and so you're going to have generally non-lethals from the police, such as tear gas and, well, I shouldn't say non-lethals because tear gas has killed people, but less lethals, as they call it. You know, sting balls, which are basically like paintballs, but like with a pepper spray like substance in them, rubber bullets, and so forth. So, for example, during like the events that happened this summer, the George Floyd uprising, I was here in DC, and like I wore goggles and a gas mask and a helmet throughout that. And I'm very glad that I did, because in addition to all the tear gas and so forth, which would have been a lot worse without it, I actually took a rubber bullet to the head that it actually hit the goggle. So there was a cut on my nose from the goggle being pushed down into my nose from it, and then a sort of half golf ball size like wound on my head. And so it like, if it was not for the goggles, and if the rubber bullet had been like barely away, it would have like hit me, you know, right in the eye. So it's that close. Like, people lost their eyes in Minneapolis, in the same way. So I think it's important to if somebody's listening to this and you're thinking about doing independent journalism and that kind of thing, I would definitely be say wear the protective gear for the actual occasion that you're going to. You probably wouldn't want to wear a bulletproof vest to an event that it makes sense that there'd be tear gas and so forth at, but not people shooting at each other. And if you're going to a situation where rival militias are going to be arguing with each other, that would probably be a good time for the vest.
Has there ever been a time when you show up somewhere and you're like, fuck this, the footage is not worth this?
Yeah, I mean, I've had situations where it definitely makes sense to stay farther back. So and situations where there are objections to the type of press that's happening. So I had a situation once where I want to say this was like August or September, but sort of following the George Floyd protests, but as they were continuing on, things were kind of escalating, and there were a lot of people from out of state at a particular event. And there were some people who took objection to the format of live streaming. And generally, I try to live stream events beginning to end, because primarily because I believe it's the only way to hold law enforcement accountable, right? If you're not live streaming and you film a cop do something bad, their target's going to be that camera, right? Like, they don't want like that footage represents a threat to them. So arresting you, anything that can make that footage go away, is valuable to them. Whereas live streaming, if it was recorded live, it's out there. And so in my mind, live stream is the best method of accountability for the police. But on that particular evening, there were people in the crowd who were actually handing out glow bracelets to say you're real media. Like, that was their credential. And I was given one of those. But and to be clear, the reason they were doing this is so that essentially people from like right-wing streamers and that sort of thing couldn't show up and be like unknown to them. They had I forget what it was, but there was some like far right. And when I say far right, I don't just mean like Daily Caller or Breitbart or something. I mean like far right like group that had come out and like pretended to be journalists or something, like on a previous night, which was why they had this view. But as they were handing these out, they were like, we don't want anybody live streaming. Like, if you're live streaming, you're not welcome. And so I actually didn't live stream until I did when police started assaulting. Or I'm probably using a strong word by saying assaulting, not as objective as I'd like to be. When the police started pushing in on them and arresting them and so forth, that was when I began basically streaming and being focused on them. But the march itself, I did not stream, essentially because I was told not to. So why do you think
they asked you not to?
I think that for some groups, they are concerned that a live stream is going to be giving their like live position and that sort of thing. With that being said, the police are always monitoring people, whether they think they are or not. So I think that it's a little bit superficial. Like, honestly, I think that, so my own personal view, and there are people who may disagree with this, but my own view is that the police are always filming, and they're not going to respect your view of not filming. And they're only going to release the footage, when they when it benefits them to do so, right? I have a friend who got shot with a rubber bullet actually on the same night I was, and she attempted to Freedom of Information Act the footage of her getting shot, which certainly exists because all of the cops had body cams on. And so she described, I was standing on this place at this time when I got shot. And they said in order to find that, we would have to go through every single piece of footage from that night, and we'd have to essentially we'd have to go through every piece of footage to find it, and then we'd have to redact every single face that's not yours. Our estimated cost for this task would be $30,000. Do you want the footage? And so it's ridiculous. Like, obviously, like, pretty much nobody, right? If your name's not Bill Gates, right? Like, I mean, slightly exaggerating, but generally speaking, like $30,000 is absolutely prohibitive, right? So the fact that the cops are not wearing body cameras that the fact that the police are wearing body cameras in some jurisdictions is practically irrelevant. All it means is that they have footage of you doing something if they want you to be in trouble. So in my mind, not streaming, not filming, right? Minimizing your recording is just giving police a monopoly on that power of information. And I'm not comfortable with that. However, to people who feel that recording, or especially like live broadcasting of their movements or so forth, somehow jeopardizes them, that is why they're concerned about it. So I will say that I do try to take an effort to like minimize perceived like risk. So if it's an event where people are expressing concern about their faces, like being able to be identified, for example, I do often try to film from kind of an angle that while I'm still capturing the essence of what's happening at the event, that I'm like behind people so that it's not like sort of in their faces, right? I've seen some journalists do this, I think, in an exaggerated fashion where they're literally just filming the people's like shoes or something. But I think you can be a little bit more creative, such as, you know, standing toward the middle or back of a march and filming forward such that you're getting sort of the backs of people's heads as they're doing the march, but you can still substantively hear what they're saying and know what, you know, what's going on.
Absolutely. And if you paid $30,000 to the cops, who's to say they're not going to cut parts of it out? Or
right.
I mean, maybe they have a 5-minute clip and you get 30 seconds. Wow.
Right.
That's
I mean, I read those emails that she showed me, and my opinion is that it was, because then when she said like basically that's outrageous, they were like, well, no, we explained what the cost would be. I don't understand why that would be wrong. Like it seemed facetious. Like I think it seemed very intentionally meant to be cost prohibitive. Like the point was to prevent you access to it. And again, this isn't just somebody trying to badger them into, you know, hey, I want body camera footage of when you went into, you know, Dunkin' Donuts because I think it's funny when cops drink coffee or something. Like this was like she was shot with a rubber bullet, and she wanted some measure of accountability to it, to at least show I got shot with a rubber bullet for no reason. I had live stream footage of when I was shot with a rubber bullet, but it's because I was recording, and, you know, someone else who didn't have the benefit of that, you know, doesn't get to prove that.
Wow, that's bananas. I know that, you know, as someone who does, you know, record a lot of rallies, protests, things like that, they do tend, or maybe they're the ones that are just the most viewed, but most of them do seem to be Trump/far right. Is that kind of what
most of whom? Journalists? Or
no, the stuff I've found that you've done.
Like that I'm covering
documentaries and stuff.
So I feel like this is like somewhat of a common like misperception of my work based on the popularity of the times that I cover far right groups. Like I live in Washington, D.C., and mostly what I film is like progressive activism. It just gets a lot less views, right? Like, you know, when I film Jesse Jackson do a peaceful march for voting rights, like it gets like less than 1,000 views. Like, and I feel like people are like practically unaware that I do it. And then when I film, you know, and I'm not saying that it's bad that people are sharing things when I do film far right events, because I'm probably doing so in a way that's complete, in a way that other outlets aren't. I think that like CNN, for example, when they go to an event like what happened this Saturday at the Capitol, like they're spending a lot of time trying to get like gotchas But like, if you were watching the news, you wouldn't really have like an understanding of like what were the sorts of things that the people on the stage were saying, right? It's not really like an accounting of the event. It's an accounting of like, you know, what CNN managed to get out of it, I guess. And so I think that there's a
The most
popularity to
salacious pieces.
yeah, and so I think that that drives people to watch my stuff, both because in the case of the right, they might like what they're seeing, or in the case of the left, they can use it to criticize the actual substance of what's going on. And I am happy with both of those things, right? I want people to be able to actually engage with the content, and I don't consider it my job to say, you know, this is good or bad or right or wrong. But I think that my videography of like public progressive activism in Washington, D.C., which is really the bulk of what I do, people just seem not to, quite respond to as much like viewership wise. But some of the fun, I mean, for me, some of the funnest events that I cover are, you know, these are very visual progressive demonstrations. Like I love filming Extinction Rebellion, for example, where like they'll do these, you know, actions like parking an entire yacht in an intersection and then like popping the tires that they drove it on and like chaining themselves to it or something. And so it's totally nonviolent, right? Like nobody's getting hurt, but watching these cops have to like cut them out and tow the yacht, like you know, that sort of stuff is you know, a lot of fun for me, and it doesn't have the same level of like anxiety for me. Like it's definitely stressful to be at situations where, you know, where people are prone to possibly getting into a violent encounter or, you know, fighting, whatever. I think those things are important to document, but I also, I kind of think there's a problem with the media only focusing on events when they turn violent, right. Or when they can get gotchas out of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was bummed you didn't come to our Medicare for All March. I was like,
I did have a contributor at the LA March for Medicare for All.
You did?
Yeah, Jake Lee Green was filming for me at the LA March for Medicare for All. Yep.
Oh, okay, because I was the MC at the DC one, so I was hoping we'd catch you there.
I'm trying to remember where I was on that day because I might have. I'd have to look back at kind of my timeline of events, but I believe I was actually in Georgia for some reason on that day.
It's okay. I still like you. It's all good. But I was like, maybe Ford will come. But yeah, that's good that
it was actually, I do remember it was my uncle's 60th birthday actually. So I was in Georgia seeing my uncle. But I did have a contributor at the LA one.
I mean, family comes first, I guess.
As much as I brand myself as a whole news outlet, and I am. I mean, I incorporated it as a news outlet. Like I am literally just one person. Like I have to edit when I have freelancers send stuff to me, it all goes through my laptop. You know, when I film something, it's just me, and that's like 2/3 of the content on there. So yeah, it is hard to keep up with because as much as I'd love to get like every single March for Medicare for All, like I kind of made a calculation and said like I guess this is going to be the one that to prioritize. And that ended up being the LA one. I would have filmed it myself if I was in the DC one, if I was in DC.
I feel bad now.
No, not at all.
Like, I wonder.
No, it's funny though. Yeah.
I figured you were in town, so it's all good. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is, I noticed you have also had issues on YouTube, like pretty much all of us have.
Yes.
But you have been demonetized. You have
Twice.
had, what's that?
Twice I've been demonetized.
You have had people steal your content and put it up as their own. So I guess, first of all, what are the best platforms to you to actually put your streams on?
So I definitely believe in like kind of diversifying in general. So I have a lot of friends who adamantly believe in this idea of using like alternative technology platforms, which I philosophically basically agree with, like the idea of competing by using like other independent sites that are less likely to censor and more, kind of allowable toward different types of content. And in principle, I basically like the idea of that, but I do have a few issues with it, and I have a few things that are sort of better about mainstream social media. So So firstly, to answer the question primarily, I use an app that allows me to simulcast to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So when I'm live, I generally am live streaming to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. The main exception is that I don't live stream to YouTube if the event is likely to have civilians carrying firearms, because YouTube has a very specific policy against the carrying of guns, which in my experience, they do not seem to count law enforcement. Like even if it's National Guard, like carrying rifles and things, it seems like they're talking about open carry by civilians. So if it's an event with guns, I only do Facebook and Twitter. I also have the two alternative tech sites that I have set up to auto cross post my YouTube videos onto are called Minds and Odyssey. And I believe Odyssey has a live stream feature. Like someone could go live just onto Odyssey, except that it, like when I go live, because I'm going live onto those other places, it just cross posts the live stream when it's done onto that platform. So the issue that I have with alt tech in general, like this idea of like just leave those places and go to the other ones, is that those other places are going to have drastically smaller audiences. Like I think that the people who end up on alt tech platforms are people who have a grievance with the other platforms. And as much as I have grievances against all the major platforms that I could talk extensively about, I don't want to just be talking to people who feel that way. I want people to see my video no matter where they are on the political spectrum, including if they're the most normal center right or center left, Republican or Democrat or whatever, right? Like I don't want to limit myself to people who are so outside the bounds of normal political conversation that they've ended up on an alt tech site, right? I am happy for people on alt tech sites to see it, but I'm also not trying to exclusively cater to them. My other issue with alt tech in general is, and this is not the case so much on Odyssey or Minds, which I do cross post onto automatically, but places like Gab and Parler, while they may technologically make sense, like their policies are theoretically pro speech, although that's questionable anyway in their cases, but they attract a very specific political orientation, right? So Gab seems to be a cesspool of mostly robots anyway, but basically Nazis, right? And I'm sure that somebody is watching this and going no, Ford, how could you say that? But honestly, it looks like it's an echo chamber basically of far right. And Parler, while perhaps politically less extreme, it seems to pretty universally be a Trump supporter platform, which again, not that I don't want Trump supporters to be able to see my work, but I wouldn't want to be on a social media platform where everybody is just already from the same political ideology as each other, right? Where I'm not reaching people who could have a meaningful conversation or debate about what it is that they're watching. The other thing I would just say about those alt tech platforms, and this is what I was alluding to before when I said their free speech policies are questionable anyway, is that Parler in particular, my understanding is that they had a policy basically against whatever they considered lewd. So even though they were a free speech platform from a perspective of conservative viewpoints not being censored, they were saying that if somebody made this is a very specific example that's actually this is a quote, right? The Parler said that somebody working at Parler said that if somebody made their username cum dumpster, that wouldn't be allowed because it's crude. And I would say honestly, on Twitter, basically porn is allowed, right? Up to and including, right? So Parler is arguably less of a free speech platform than Twitter. It's just that their sense of what should be censored is an extremely conservative viewpoint, which is that conservative views, far right views, whatever, are all fine, and maybe they have sort of a wraparound view that and the left's political speech can be included in that. But then they go, oh, and if you're, if it's too like graphically sexual, then we don't want that conversation on there. But like, words are words, right? Like,
Right.
I think that if they can't really purport to be a principled free speech application if they're going to say that, that like a sexuality is an off-topic subject to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And they just go type that into RedTube after they're done anyway. So
yeah, right. The part, like the Parler staffer might have been able to like literally like after saying like what Parler is not allowed to have on the website, he like copy paste that list like into Google, for his next activity.
I wonder what this is. It sounds interesting.
Right. It's just for research.
One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was, people stealing your stuff, even though it's clearly yours.
Right.
What happens? Have they just agreed to take it down, or have you ever had to, go through filing, grievances? Like, what has happened with that?
Yeah. So firstly, I will just say, if you see the News to Share logo on on anything you see on TV, or also like if you see my name on a piece of footage, there's a good chance that I haven't seen it, right? So like I generally live with the understanding that probably most infringements of my work that happen, I probably don't find. And, that sort of sucks. And for the most part, the way that I end up finding infringements is that people tell me, I just saw your thing on Fox News. I just saw your thing on CNN or whatever. Or I just saw your name, or I just saw your logo. So people reaching out to me, like the thing that I've said, and I mean this sincerely, if you reach out to me and it's something that I didn't know about already, then I will buy you a beer in person. Or if you have or if that's not possible because you're in somewhere far away or something like that, I will actually send you $10 like on Venmo. So that's the first thing, like just literally like if you see something, say something. But
people are Googling right now because my viewers are just as broke as me, so they're like, beer, yes, $10.
And I have actually done that. Like I've paid that out when people have told me, but when people tell me. But sometimes, I mean, honestly, when certain political documentaries come out, and I'm like, this is so like on the subjects I've covered, like I watch them on purpose to like check, and I have found infringements that way. I won't name this film, but like that has happened to me, like where I watched a Netflix film specifically because it was on a subject that I cover a lot, and it did have like a considerable infringement, and they did settle. But the other way that I find actually a lot of them is YouTube has it might be over a certain number of subscribers like that it becomes available, but I got this feature when it became a feature, that it will actually like browse the rest of YouTube for you and tell you when it matches a video, and it will suggest to you, is this yours? What's interesting is that it doesn't allow you to do the thing where like when someone infringes with music, it seems like they have agreements with recording studios that allow the content to actually stay online, but it gets monetized and then goes to the original content creator. It doesn't have that for video. So when people infringe on my videos on YouTube, essentially I just have a binary choice, which is leave it or request that it go down. And so there's usually two options, which are 7-day removal, where like it can where basically it informs them, News to Share thinks that you've taken their footage. Basically, you have 7 days to take it down or contest it for whatever reason. But like it's all I never report it if it's not actually stolen from me. And then they avoid any kind of a penalty to their account if they just delete it within 7 days. So I generally go with that option so that people aren't actually penalized, like as far as other YouTubers are concerned, if they just steal my stuff. And to be clear, I tend not to do that if the person has like meaningfully done something else with the video. So if someone just throws their own watermark on top of my footage, I don't like that, right? But if somebody is actually doing a commentary where they're like, I was watching this footage and I think this, or they watch it live and respond to it and make jokes about it or something. Like those sorts of videos I have no issue with, and I do not report them in that way. But usually the most that I do in those cases is that I'll say, like, I'll send them a link and say, can you please like actually put the link to the original in your description if they don't have that already. So like to the extent that I'm concerned about people stealing my stuff, I mostly am really worried about like corporations doing so, right? When it's a big name like a CBS or a Fox or a CNN or something. It's not like small YouTubers that I'm like especially worried about, trying to like go after or something like that. In the case of big films, though, like if you're watching a movie in the movie theater and my footage has come up on it and it wasn't licensed, like, and that has happened, right? Then, I can usually like go and seek like a settlement with them. Like I have a copyright guy who does that with me.
Wow, that's freaking bananas that you actually have a guy because that happens so much.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I found when I was researching is there was a screenshot of, now this, I'm not sure when this was because it didn't have a date, but there was a screenshot that when somebody went to your Twitter page, it was all white and it said click, because content could be graphic or something. Like none of your posts showed up at all unless they clicked the button. That's fucking insane. Is it still doing that?
So it looked like that from like just after January 6th until May of this year. So it was like that for about 5 months. And so, so that's basically like my entire profile was marked sensitive, which meant that every single, so if you went to my actual page, twitter.com/Ford Fischer, right, you would have to, click a button to make any of it be visible. But in addition to that, like even if you click that button, or if you would see my tweets anywhere else on Twitter, if they had any media, like anything other than text, so a link, a video, a photo, if it had anything else, then you would have to click another button to see that because it's potentially sensitive content. And essentially that's the designation that actually happens on when somebody has like a profile with frontal nudity on it, right? Like that's actually the level of severity. Like basically they treated my account as severely as a porn account for about 4 months following January 6th. And so presumably the reason that occurred is that I filmed, I wouldn't even say that January 6th was incredibly graphic violence as far as what was on my video. Like I don't think I captured blood. For example, it was a lot of things going boom, right? Like flash grenades, people spraying stuff, people smashing doors, but and to be clear, disturbing things like I filmed a guy describing that he had just seen what we later found out was Ashley Babbitt being shot, right? So a very, very, very fresh kind of interview with someone who had just witnessed a homicide. But I mean, all journalism and none of it like graphic in a way that couldn't, appear in a pretty easy PG-13 movie, right? So that was quite unfortunate. What ultimately ended up happening was around May, I got the email of a staffer at Twitter. I emailed them and I actually did get a response where they tried to say, is it because of your settings? And I was like, no. And I screenshotted all of my settings and sent them to them. And then they didn't reply after that, but it did seem to change. And so now my Twitter doesn't look like that. However, you can actually go to, if you Google search shadow ban test, you can do this. And so you could do it with my account or anybody else's. But there's multiple different ways that an account can be shadow banned. And so right now I'm actually still shadow banned in 2 ways, which are that, and I encourage you to test it, right? I promise this is true, right? If you search my name and you don't already follow me, then you will see that I'm search suggestion banned, which means that even though you can search for me and I can show up in the results, it will show other names and not mine in the like filling it in. So you type at FORD, you're getting Ford Corporation, all the, whatever. But if you type my entire name at Ford Fischer, there's one other guy on Twitter named Ford Fischer who's completely unrelated to me. I've talked to him a couple of times, which is funny. He has a podcast on completely unrelated subjects, but like it'll recommend him and not me.
That's what happened to me yesterday. That's why I was like, I can't tag you.
Right.
It won't bring you up.
Because it won't just show up. Right. And so it makes it very
Yeah.
difficult because somebody just trying to tag me, it like won't come up. But they can still type at Ford Fischer and it would work, but it's not going to suggest it. And so you don't know that it actually like worked or not. The other thing is that I'm still apparently shadow banned on like replies. So like if I reply to someone else's tweet by responding with another tweet, that shows up in like the show additional replies or something like that. Like it basically masks what are considered to be maybe dangerous responses. And all of mine currently end up in those, I think, for people who don't follow me.
So it could be you being like, hey, thanks, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And it's like sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, I actually today I had a back and forth response with another verified journalist, Tess Owens at Vice, and I did the shadow ban test actually a little bit after that, and it describes to you how it knows that your reply deboosted by giving you a link to the tweet that was deboosted. And even though she was responding, like we went back and forth, we were kind of talking about a situation that happened on Saturday. Like it was still, that was a deboosted reply. Like two journalists who were both at an event talking to each other about that event. But if you were looking at her post, it would be a hidden reply because it might be a scary reply.
Oh my God.
Or a sensitive one.
They started doing that on Facebook as well, where they were, I forget the exact terminology, but they were doing that. Something extremist. I got marked as one, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, so there were two different notifications that people could get. There was this there was something about like basically you may have been there were two options. Like one was that you might have been exposed to extremist content.
Yes.
And here are options. And then like the other one was like you may have it basically like accuses like the person reading it of like you might be an extremist. Like it was like, do you need help? Like kind of thing. Like, and both of them referred to the same thing, but they were like slightly different wordings. And I remember it was really funny because I woke up that morning. I forget what date it was now, but it was one day that this happened to everybody, and it was very like funny. Like, but I woke up and all of the posts on my Facebook newsfeed were people saying like, I got the extremism thing. And I remember like the thought that was going through my head is like, why don't I have one? Like, this is like my whole like job is like documenting political activism and extremism. Like, why didn't I get one? And it showed up at like 2 p.m. that day. And so I was given the, you might have been exposed to extremism. And I'm like, that's fair. I might have been.
I was just complaining about the Democrats, and I got one. I was like, I'm going to keep getting this shit like 15 times a day. But then there was that thing on, I forget what this site is, on Twitter, but you can see like your percentage of like how mean you are on Twitter and like how people view you. And I was like, I'm gonna get 100. This is awesome. People call me Savage Joy. Yes, that's what's up. And I got a 17%. And I'm like, this is not okay.
You're 17% nice and 83% mean? Is that
no.
Or was it the opposite? Oh, they think that you're 83% nice and only 17% mean?
Which is such bullshit.
Yeah, you gotta get those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. You gotta no. I think Twitter. Honestly, so here's the thing about Twitter. I use it because like journalists, like I guess like it's their main way of finding stuff, and so I found that it's been helpful to me to use it. It gets me a lot of licensing and that sort of thing, which is why I end almost all of my threads with all my footage is available to license. But I hate Twitter. I really actually hate it as a platform. I hate the forced brevity of the format of tweets. Like the whole concept of like my work is like footage being very raw and complete. And I think that the format of Twitter is about constant scrolling, extremely reductive posting where you're trying to compress your thoughts into, like very few like letters, literally like letters. And so I feel like it forces just such concise political conversation that it forces people to have like extreme you can't pack nuance into that sort of thing. And I think that probably the viewer retention out of the places that I post, my guess, although Twitter doesn't give very thorough analytics, is that Twitter's probably where I'm getting the lowest video like viewer retention, not the lowest number of views, but like people watching my stuff. I can't imagine that they're watching it for very long when the whole platform is about scrolling, right? So I think that the conversations also can be fairly toxic. Like I find that like people who are critical of like there's so much like nitpicking of like every single word, and like if you didn't report it exactly the way that somebody else would have, like you're like exactly their enemy, right? And so that's very, very frustrating to me. And I think that Twitter essentially is aware of that phenomena of the fact that the brevity breeds like fury at one another, and that's like kind of the culture and the environment on there. Like I think that they're aware of that, and I think that that probably suits them. I think they're probably happy with that fact, because I haven't seen any like real effort to like lower the temperature of Twitter. So you know, I think that might be just being in the politics space on Twitter, but basically if you're tweeting about anything other than cute like dogs, cats, and bunny rabbits, like, you know, somebody on Twitter hates you.
Yeah, Twitter absolutely does not care about bullies whatsoever. I've had a stalker for 7 months who threatens to call Social Security disability on me and say I'm lying. And I mean, he is psycho.
Oh my God.
Hundreds of people have reported him like every day for months. Still there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when it comes to, you're right, when it comes to people who are political, they're just like, expendable. Let them deal with it. No big deal. But I digress a bit, but I would be remiss if we did not discuss Julian Assange. So as a journalist, you know, first of all, what was your response when you saw the footage of him getting taken in 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a challenging subject for me because I try not to like essentially express feelings about the things that I cover, and I do film a lot of activism that takes place for Julian Assange. But on the other hand, in my non sort of taking sides like viewpoint of what my work should be, I also think that I have a strong inherent kind of anti-censorship, free speech, pro-journalism, pro-transparency position. And so that puts me into sort of solidarity in a way with him. And so I think that people can certainly have criticisms of like the man himself. And I think I probably hesitate to go like too deeply into talking about him. But I think that my general viewpoint of that case is that the precedent that it would set is deeply concerning for press rights, right? So like the Obama administration obviously abhorred the leaks of military intelligence to WikiLeaks, which in turn published them to the world. And we found out about the basically the collateral murder of the Reuters journalists. I mean, clearly a press freedom issue, as well as the killing of unarmed civilians. And so even the Obama administration, who went very hard on Chelsea Manning, like originally seeking the death penalty, and then ultimately after acquitting her on the highest charge, which could have yielded the death penalty, sentencing her to 35 years. And then, of course, Obama did commute her sentence to 7 years. Just a little bit of history for people who don't know that. They examined the concept of whether to attempt to prosecute Julian Assange. And what they established was that it would set a precedent that immunizes the media from like liability for publishing content that has been sort of leaked, right? So the precedent, the American actual precedent is that, if you're a military contractor or something, you are not allowed to leak things, right? But if something gets leaked to the press or otherwise, it is not the job of the journalist to then conceal the classified information, right? Once it's out there, and the journalist can publish it. And they may have a responsibility to be responsible in some way ethically with what they do with it, right? So Edward Snowden, for example, essentially committed a crime by stealing information and then handing it to people like Glenn Greenwald. But he gave it to people who he trusted could release the information in a way that wouldn't yield harm, right? And Julian Assange definitely just threw things out there. And, I think people have had certainly debates over the efficacy of just releasing raw information like that. People have certainly had debates about, the sources of information, right? Like the which stuff has he accepted and published. First, is he willing to take things from Russia has been like a criticism and so forth. And so I don't want to dive like too much into those things, but the precedent that WikiLeaks sets as a case where Julian Assange, as a publisher who did not personally leak anything, could be imprisoned for 175 years. I think that that's extraordinarily scary to me, right? To put it as a local example, here in Washington, D.C., there were hackers who apparently hacked the Metropolitan Police Department here's database, and they got a bunch of files, and they were trying to threaten. This was purely like a black hat hacking operation. They tried to threaten the DC police into paying them in cryptocurrency in order to avoid the release of the documents. And then they released some of them. And I'm not sure how that resolved, if they released all that they had or if they paid them any amount or whatever. But they released all of these documents, and I actually found my name in two of them. Right? There was on January, I believe it was January 17th and January 18th of this year, they were evaluating threats to inauguration security based on rallies there were armed rallies that occurred at state capitals on January 17th and January 18th, and they described my reporting on those places because I had asked the Boogaloos about, basically, do you have any feelings about the inauguration? And they basically said, not really. And so they included in those these operational security reports that I think they were marked as sensitive but not classified or something. That according to video by Ford Fischer, the Boogaloos do not appear to have plans to go to Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day or something like that. And I did publish those on Twitter. I thought it was interesting. It wasn't actually a particularly consequential sort of piece of intelligence, but I thought it was interesting that apparently the police had watched my content or used my content in their kind of intelligence analysis for the inauguration. Right? I thought that was fascinating. But if we lived in a world in which Julian Assange was convicted, right, and it remains to be seen whether he'll be extradited, and then if he gets here, it remains to be seen whether he'd be tried and convicted. But if we live in a world where he's convicted and that conviction is upheld, then me taking something that's already been released to the public and publishing it could be dangerous, right? That could be something where the police go, well, you weren't supposed to have access to that, right? And even though someone else leaked it and it ended up in the public, the act of publishing it would be considered a crime. And, currently that's the Constitution basically says that would be the right of the free press to do so. And the prosecution of Julian Assange would suggest otherwise.
Absolutely. So on a more fun note,
Okay.
who has inspired you journalistically?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think that the entire world of political journalism has evolved a lot. I think early on in when I sort of started this company with again at the time Trey Yingst, we found a lot of influence in the very early live streams of Occupy Wall Street, which both of us had seen in high school. I was in high school when Occupy happened. And so the concept that was live streamed, as opposed to, you can watch the news, but then there were individuals who were able to have these 22-hour streams, showing just the entire, thing all the way. That felt very sort of revolutionary. And so I'm intentionally not naming names of specific people who have then gone on to be very commentary based on YouTube. And some might argue divisive rather than just live streaming, the thing. But for me, that kind of raw influence, this will sound like an extremely weird comment, but I would say that the philosophical predecessor, the philosophical thing that I'm emulating, but just in a different setting, is C-SPAN. I actually think the mission of C-SPAN, right, just showing political hearings, so you have access to Congress, right? And that C-SPAN itself really, really is non-sided, right? Like, like it's funny because people sometimes criticize me about, oh, you're filming, somebody give a speech, and I don't like that person. How could you film them? You're giving them a platform or something, right? Nobody watches, Ted Cruz read Green Eggs and Ham in Congress on C-SPAN and then goes, God damn C-SPAN, why would they film him do this, dumb thing, right? They're mad at Ted Cruz if they don't like him, or they're like, oh yeah, awesome, Ted Cruz. But nobody's affixing their political opinion to C-SPAN itself. And so I think that we've entered this area of really in the Trump era in particular, because Trump really politicized media, right? The fake news and all that kind of stuff, right? That media was with him or against him. And so there became this very, very binary left. You're either the kind of American center left, I should say, or you're the Trumpist, Trump right or whatever. And those are the teams. There's red team and blue team on the media. And I think everybody's become really affixed to this concept that there has to be one or the other. Throughout all of that, right? Nobody talks about it oh, yay, we're celebrating this. But C-SPAN didn't change, right? C-SPAN actually remained a platform that pretty much just shows the speeches or the politicians, the hearings, and you just see exactly what's going on. And it doesn't matter how the cameraman feels about it. And that's really what I try to present to people of political activism.
I think it's so freaking incredible that young people have been learning these things so early. I was in my late 30s in 2015 when I first heard about Bernard Sanders. And that's when everything changed for me. I didn't know this shit. I was oblivious to so much. And I always think about, God, if I were in high school when I learned about politics and stuff. So props to you for being exposed to these things so young. I'm envious of that. Something I always ask every person I have on is, what is something you want to leave with the viewers? Something for them to take away?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think
Everybody always says that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I would just say question when you're watching any kind of news, what is the point that they're trying to make in their coverage? Are they trying to show me what's happening, or are they trying to guide me toward a particular point of view? And particularly when you see fast cutting kind of, especially really provocative individual moments, try to find the source of the thing or some other angle of the thing that happened independently. So my focus is activism, but I think that this probably exists in other places as well. Try to find source material. The news outlets often just really compress things to make the point that they want to. If you're watching Tucker Carlson, your view of Black Lives Matter or the anti-fascist movement, any of these things is just that they spend all their time setting fires, crashing into, breaking windows and everything, right? And when you watch, if you watch CNN throughout the Trump era, all you would get is essentially the most dumbfounding Trump comments, but not most of what he said. It's not like they spent all their time talking about Trump, but they didn't spend their time talking about all Trump did. They were it was very, very focused on the moments that they thought were zingers, right? But you're not getting the whole, everything. So I would just say that now we have the technology that that usually, especially in public situations like political activism, there's usually a lot more to the story than you're able to see. And so if you're really letting something shape your views, seeing a clip on the news, try to find the whole thing, because it's probably out there. And the news usually credits the source, right? The news outlets rely so heavily on social media, on independent journalists, and so forth. And so often they have the credit right on it. If you're watching carefully enough, you probably can find the context for most things that are presented without context on the mainstream media. So I would say diversify sources and seek context for what you see online and on TV.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight, Ford. I really appreciate it. Give everyone your email, or not email. Give
Social
them your
security
phone number,
number,
your email,
birthday,
your
mother's maiden name.
website.
Yeah. So no, the outlet. So the website is news2share.com. It's news the number 2 share.com. But I mostly honestly am accessible and so forth on social media. So on Facebook, it's news2share, news the number 2 share, one word. On Twitter, it's at N2S Reports is the handle, and I'm at Ford Fischer, FordFischer, and it's also News to Share on YouTube. I also do have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Ford Fischer, and the username on there is News to Share. So I'm very accessible on any of those places. If you send me a PM on Twitter, like I usually see it, and when they're not mean, or even if they're only a little bit mean, but there's like something to answer, right? Like I try to actually be pretty responsive. So I try to be kind of an open book. If people have questions, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, you were super responsive. I was like, I don't even know if he's going to see this shit, but I'm going to reach out. And within an hour, you're like, hey. I was like, what the fuck? This typically doesn't happen. So yeah, that's awesome. I'm not used to that. So thank you again so much. Thank you guys for watching. Wednesday is my weekly show with Compton J on Fred Hampton Network, or Fred Hampton Leftist. And I announced 2 days ago, I am flying out to LA, and I will be meeting up with Patrick, and we will be doing a book signing of our Shitlib parody book. It's also going to be a comedy show with Jimmy Dore, his wife Steph, the miserable lib, Rick Overton, who was on The Office for 10 years, and I'm going to be doing comedy as well. So this should be interesting. It's a one-time deal. You have to laugh because I'm blind and you're ableist twat waffles if you don't. So anyway, definitely check out our book at savageandpat.com. Check out my Twitter for a link to tickets. There's not a lot of tickets left at all. So definitely jump on that. But thanks again, and hit the like button and subscribe. And thanks so much, Ford. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Absolutely. Take care.